Thank you, Jesse. I'm on here and I'll help you with any help.
Cool. Sounds good. Welcome to week 3 of the certification challenge. It is so good to be here with you, and we are streaming live from YouTube right now, and so grateful and glad you could join us today. We're super happy to be with you. I'm just going to make sure that everything is coming through all right and double check on the channel. I'm going to go ahead and make sure we've got our chat here. Awesome. Good. I see you guys. And I am so excited to be here with you today. You know, I tell you what, it is absolutely awesome to be learning more about Magento, more just increasing our skill set as developers. That's what we do. And that's what I am excited to be here talking with you about. And honestly, it is absolutely fantastic that you are putting in the effort to do that, to improve yourself as a developer. And I just want to start off with saying this: great work and keep it up. You are doing fantastic. Don't let up now. You're not quite there. And so just stay after it. You'll get there. It is so rewarding to have passed that certification when you get to that and have that credential behind your name. It's definitely worth it. And again, it's not just about having that credential behind your name. It's also about having that knowledge and having the skill set and basis that you can go and work on clients' projects and get things done, get bugs solved. We've had an interesting week here at Swift Otter, and we've had a lot of work going on, and there's been a lot of things coming through the pipeline, and we've been moving really quickly and getting a lot of stuff done. And it's one of those times that there's just no substitute for skill set, for experience, for knowledge. And that's what we're trying to get to with this certification challenge. So it's worth it. The time and effort is going to pay off in the future as you study now and improve and build and work through that. I'm gonna check this out real quick. I'm seeing that the video stream is flipped, and so I'll be making an adjustment here shortly on that. But it is great to see you guys, to be here with you. And what we're gonna do is we are gonna talk about studying, and that's kind of what this challenge is all about. And we're going to focus on that. So let me pull up this right here, and let's grab some slides here. So we're focusing on a couple of different courses. Some of the main courses that courses and certifications that we're focusing on here is the expert developer, the business practitioner, the front-end developer. Those are kind of the foundation of what we're working on. And we'll get to some other things as well. There's still the JavaScript developer. There's the professional developer, which is kind of a stepping stone to the expert developer. But those tests are kind of our focus. So we have 2 developer focused tests, which is the expert developer and the front-end developer. And then we have the business practitioner, which is not development related. And a lot of you who are not working specifically on development, that one is great for kind of learning, communicating those business requirements and things like that, and analyzing like a client's situation and what would work well for them in any given situation. So that's the focus of that. But honestly, a lot of developers take business practitioners as well and try to gain a better understanding of the way that Magento works and be able to use it more effectively to meet clients' needs. So I'm going to take a quick look here. Let us jump in. I'm going to see if we can't get this flipped around. One moment. All right. Just bear with me just a moment while we get this these slides flipped around here. We're going to bring this down here. This is how stuff works. Okay. My technical team is communicating with me on these things right here, and we're gonna get it figured out. Here we go. And that looks much better. Thank you for your patience. We got it. All right. Fantastic. I'm gonna show you some slides here real quick. So as an introduction, much of this knowledge seems basic, but it's important to focus on those basics, because if we don't get those basics, then we will often miss the bigger picture. And so often, I see developers struggle with this in zooming out and being able to zoom out and see the whole entire picture of what they're working on. And so we want to kind of do two things here. We want to focus on the basics, and we want to make sure that we have that big overall perspective, but we also want to make sure that we are getting deep into it as well. And so I kind of see it as wide, and there's like that sort of a foundation, but then from there we build pillars on it, and we make sure that we have areas that we are going deeply into and getting that sort of depth of knowledge as well. Now, obviously, it takes years of experience to build up a lot of depth of knowledge, but as we start off and as we study for some of these exams, we can take just a few areas and we can dive deeply into those, try to get a better understanding. And there's benefits to doing that. You know, we get the opportunity with that to see other areas of the Magento architecture, for instance, that we wouldn't have been familiar with otherwise. So while it seems like we're kind of have this narrow sort of focus, we really are getting these other touch points as we do this. And there's this sort of like gradual building of knowledge that happens. You know, when I started learning development in earnest, I went to a number of different PHP conferences, and there was some great speakers, some talented individuals that did a lot of education and things like that. And I remember coming out of some of those, like my brain was literally about to explode, so filled up with knowledge that I had no idea what I was going to do with, that I didn't think I was going to be able to make use of any of it. And yet over that next 6 months or something like that, like there would be something from a talk that somebody had given that would just come back and click. And I'd be like, oh, that's the term that I'm looking for. I should go Google it. And then I Google it and boom, there we go. I have exactly what I need. And so there will be plenty of times as you're studying that you'll be like, this is ridiculous. Like, how would I ever use this in real life? Or you'd be like, oh man, I can't remember all this stuff. Or this is just way too much for me to cram into my head. And yet keep pushing through that, because when you do, you will actually be storing some of those things to long-term memory in your mind, and they'll come back later. So there's benefit there. So again, we're looking at kind of the two things. One is we want to make sure we get that foundation broad, not necessarily thick, it doesn't have to be, but then also deep in some areas. So we kind of have that sort of little bit of a balance right there. One great place for a deep dive for those of you studying for developer certifications is the application initialization, and just getting an idea of how Magento actually runs. You know, when you start off with Magento, it can seem like a bit of a magical universe. It's so big, and all of the things that happen can be so distant and so weird and so strange, and yet it's just files. Like, it's literally just a bunch of PHP and JavaScript and XML, CSS files put together that make the whole thing run. Like, okay, maybe it's just a little bit more than that, but at the core, at the basis, that's really what it is. And we don't want to lose sight of that. Like, we don't want to just think of it as being some sort of weird, strange universe or galaxy that we're floating through. We can actually get in there and touch it, and we can explore, and we can find out what we are working on, and learn those things well. So that's an important aspect of it, is taking that time to learn those things. And that's a great place to start, going into Pub Index and step by step working through what that looks like. So that's what you can do. You can start off in the admin panel, just going into the admin after you log in. Set a breakpoint in set a breakpoint right there in the controller, the admin HTML order index controller, and walk through it. Basically, you're going to start off in Pub Index and work your way, stepping down into methods rather, as you go through the application architecture, and you'll eventually get to this right here if you are on the typical order view page. So that one, as you go along there, look at what variables are being passed in there. Look at what your context is. Keep good tabs on the stack trace that shows over in Xdebug. We're going to talk about Xdebug just a little bit more here soon, but that's an important part of the way that you study. I'm going to just drop in a quick little note here about cache as well. Cache is an important part of the way that Magento runs, and even for those studying business practitioner, I think it's important to know the way that caches work. There's about 8 to 10 different default caches in Magento, and each one of them kind of serves a different purpose. And one of the things that's kind of a standard route for developers who are a little bit less familiar with Magento is when they have a problem to just blow away the entire cache, to do the CLI bin Magento cache clean command. And one thing that does is that's effective. It eliminates your cache concerns. However, what I suggest you do is try to make a habit in the time, if you are not familiar with what the different caches do, try to make a habit of taking the first step of identifying which caches should be flushed. And if you can identify those, then just delete those and see if that fixes your problem. And if it doesn't, no problem, go on to clear the whole cache. But if it does, you've just saved yourself a good bit of time, because now Magento doesn't have that whole entire architecture, that whole system to like rebuild and recache. Of course, unless you have one of those new MacBook Pros, which is a lot faster. But even then, it still takes my system a good 10, 15 seconds to build from a clean cache. So cleaning the cache, removing var view preprocessed, and clearing out pub static, those are common instructions that you see online that people are like, if you have a problem, try this. And I suggest, until you identify, and as you learn which applies to which, be a little bit hesitant on that first step. And as you do that, you'll start to learn, oh, if I am having a problem with changing di.xml, I don't need to flush the block HTML cache, unless for some reason it affects those block caches. But if I'm working on UI components in the admin panel or something like this, or something else unrelated to block HTML cache specifically, then you don't need to flush that, and you'll save yourself time. But there's a benefit down the road too, because as you get into more difficult troubleshooting tasks, it can be more important which ones you clear. So just a little plug for which caches you clear, and one of those ways that you can kind of slowly teach yourself that relevance without having to worry about just going in there and learning it all in one step. Give yourself that time. But if you want to clear the whole cache, give yourself a second to clear just the caches you think will apply, and then see if that works. So deep dive into Magento. So one of the things that, you know what, hang on a second. I think I have, need to switch over here. You'll give me just a second here. I actually am going to use this one right here. Alrighty, so then Here we go. It's better. All righty. Awesome. I love talking about Magento. It's such a great application, and it's so limitless what you can do with it. You know, I was talking with someone recently about architecture, and I think that there's so much of Magento that has been architected in such a fantastic way. Like, there is so much potential for what you can do with it, and I think it's a great application. Is it one that's going to solve everyone's business needs? No, of course not. But it's a really good application. So anyways, talking about deep dives and the importance of that as it relates to the development focused exam. So that's one aspect, and one very practical aspect where you can go in a specific class, especially if you're studying for the expert developer, the professional developer, where you can jump in right there. And I want to also remind you to check out swiftauto.com/challenge if you haven't already. And it is a place that I highly recommend you go signing up. And you're going to hear about this a little bit more today, but one of the things that you get as a result of this is the study groups that we are doing. And those are so important. I can't even hardly tell you how important those are for your study. So if you were not part of the study groups last week, you are absolutely missing out, and you should be part of them next week. So next week, right about this time, make sure that you are part of a study group for your certification. So we have a number of them available, and it's a really laid back, informal sort of like get together and let's hang out. And it's not teaching, but what it is the leader of the group helping and explaining how to get the information that you're looking for. You know what? That's half of the challenge sometimes, is knowing how to find the information that you're looking for. And that's what we do. We help facilitate those conversations. And so it's like a group sort of setting where we just get on Google Meet and we just hang out there for a while, ask questions, talk about things, look at Magento core code, all of that stuff, you name it, we talk about it. And of course, there's other benefits to signing up on swiftauto.com/challenge. And that's that you'll get some your shot at some Bose headphones for the highest scores. And of course, there's the t-shirts too, which we are giving away to 60 of you. And those pretty snazzy design there, 2022 for the 60 highest scoring participants. Now, I want to give a special shout out to two folks who have already passed their certifications. And I think this is pretty cool. Andre and Peter, congratulations. Good for you guys. I think that is awesome. We've like just 3 weeks into this challenge, and you've already gotten that going. So some of you might be asking about which test is right for you. And this is a little bit of a review. So if you've already made this decision, one of the things that I would say is stick with the decision that you've made. Just go for it. And if you fail the test, if that's financially acceptable for you, that's okay. And just do your absolute best. If you feel like you're in a little bit over your head, that's okay. Keep going, keep working at it. You'll get there. And even if you fail the first time, you'll be able to study through the things that you missed, and you'll take it again and hopefully pass that second time. So one of the things is just like, it is okay to fail the test the first time. Like, it's obviously not ideal, and there's that extra fee for the exam voucher, which depending on where you are and everything like that, that is a difficulty. But it's not like you lose some status or something like that. Like, you can't retake it or anything like that. Like, you want to study it so that way you do pass the first time. But if you end up being in over your head or something like that, and you fail that first time, it's okay. Just double down on your study. But honestly, one of the things that I want to do today is to try to get you to double down on your study, because it's worth it. And I think you could pass the first time. I mean, I have been able to work with a number of you from the Magento community. And I tell you what, we have some smart people in the Magento community, some very capable. And it's just so cool to see developers solve problems, build code, create solutions for their clients, and it can get me excited. So keep it up, and keep going after it. And again, just that question of which test. If you're already studying for something, stay after it. If you're not a developer, business practitioner is for you. If you are a developer and are new to Magento, professional developer is probably going to be your best bet. And then if you're more on the front end side of it, then the front end exam is certainly a great one to take. I personally lean a little bit away from JavaScript. And there's a couple reasons for that, but it's still a good test. And if you've already done front end, then go by all means do JavaScript. But I would not start with JavaScript. I would do front end before you do JavaScript. So that's my take on that. And of course, professional before expert, and expert before expert plus if you're a top of the line developer. So effective studying. Let's talk about studying. And you might have heard the old adage that says practice makes perfect. And you know what? That's not true. I don't know why people keep saying that, because that's not actually how it works. There's missing one very important word, and that is perfect. So if you perfect, practice makes perfect. We default to our training. That's just how it works for us. And so while practice can be helpful, if we repeat the same thing that doesn't actually help us, doesn't actually do anything good for us, in the sense of maybe it just cements bad habits or something like that, then we're not actually benefiting as much as we could from the other way. In fact, we could be even hindering ourselves because of that practice in a way that is hindering, that isn't right. I play the bass, and I love playing the bass. It's such a great instrument. It's so much fun. And I have, every now and then, I teach myself a bad habit, and I have to then slowly and painstakingly unlearn that habit. For instance, one of them that I like to do is send my pinky finger way off flying into space. And when I need it, I have to bring it way in back. Well, that's all just habit. That's all how I've been practicing. And so if I keep my fingers in the place that they should be when I'm practicing, when I go to perform, guess where my fingers are? They're in the right place. And how does that relate to development? Well, it relates in the sense that we want to be very careful how we study. For instance, if you're taking a developer-related test and you're not spending probably 50% of your time or more in the code, you're probably not studying in a way that's going to help you pass that test. That head knowledge that you're going to be learning through reading manuals and things like that is beneficial. Don't get me wrong. And you have to start somewhere. You have to start there. But you have to be in the code in order to be able to pass the test. Again, for the developer-related test, it's just how it works. But there's a corollary to the non-developer test too, business practitioner, where if you're not in the admin panel, if you're not actually doing things in the admin panel, then you're going to have trouble with that as well, because just reading information isn't good enough. And actually getting in there and doing it is much better. There's another level of this, and that's teaching. We'll talk about that just a little bit more, but don't study by yourself. This comes back to those study groups once again. Be in a group of people that's going to support you through this process, and you will be more successful in reaching your goals, especially as you communicate. I'm just amazed. For me, when I communicate, when I teach something, how much better it cements it in for me. It's crazy the difference that it can make. So being consistent is really important. And again, being consistent with good study, putting your mind to the test, or to the task, I should say. One tip that I would offer is to not check email before you study, and just think about what time of day works best for you. What time of day your mind is clearest and most curious, most interested in the subject matter that you're studying. I know for me, morning is absolutely the best time for me. My mind is so much clearer. I can make decisions so much better. I can be so much more, I guess you'd say, aggressive, in the sense of like being willing to go after things and figure stuff out and all of that in the morning. And so the morning is a better time for me. And so before you open email, set aside that 30 minutes, that 1 hour, that 2 hours, so that way you can study on there. And Slack as well. I don't know if Slack will become the new email, but there's something to be said about that. So you might just want to keep Slack closed. as well. So how do we actually make this happen? One of the things that's hard, especially depending on your work, is to carve out the time. And even when you carve out that time, it can be hard to focus and to dedicate that time to study. Think about the distractions that you have in that process, in that time. If you have actually successfully set aside some time, then make sure you keep that set aside for study. Use that time well for study. So turn off your phone if you need to. Eliminate other distractions. We already talked about Slack and email. And so if there's ways for you to identify and eliminate those distractions, kind of try to have that time be really precious and guarded, if you will. And even if you can only get 30 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day of guarded, focused time is going to be so helpful and so beneficial for you later. And so try to guard that time as carefully as you can. One of the things that I think is easy to skip in this process in thinking about studying well and studying right is the environment that we have to study in. And this is super important. And again, it comes back to that aspect of practicing the bass for me, making sure my fingers are in the right place. For you, that's setting up your local environments where you have a fully stock or out of the box installation of Magento that you can make any changes that you want to. And you can get in there and play around and mess with it and make changes and break it and reinstall it and start over. And that's okay. And nobody's going to have a problem with that. So if you don't have one set up, set one up today. And again, that applies for the developer exams. And be curious. That's such an important part of it. Be curious, ask questions. If you don't know what the code is doing, figure it out. There couldn't be a better time to do that. And that will, again, pay off down the road. If you don't have Xdebug running on your local environment, then now is a good time to get that set up. Remember that deep dive that I briefly mentioned earlier? That is how you would do that. You wouldn't go through and set like print R or var dump statements in there. You would step through with Xdebug and keeping track of that context. And so set it up. Sometimes it can be a pain to set up, although Xdebug 3 works a lot better than Xdebug 2. So get it running and step through the code. Even if you're on the front end, take a few minutes sometime if you have the opportunity to get that running and to go through a block and make sure you understand how a block is set up and understand the components surrounding building templates and the way that they relate to blocks and view models. That will help you so much because you won't have to rely on the backend developers as much to make this little tweak here or to add this block there or something along those lines that otherwise you might have needed to. And even then, just like taking a look at plugins or controllers or some of those backend concepts, models, resource models can be really beneficial even for front-end developers. Now, they're not going to help you pass the test, but if you have a little bit of extra time in there, don't just dismiss that because it's not part of your field. It can be really beneficial to have just even a little bit of knowledge there. But again, not exactly relating to passing the test, but when you study, it's okay to have a little bit of flexibility there on what you study exactly. You want to, again, it comes down to that breadth, right? That breadth of knowledge. Even though, especially in your specialty for your test, you want to make sure that goes deep as well. So then for the business practitioner, make sure that you have a commerce environment running. That can be hard to get sometimes. So hopefully you're working with a partner or something like that will provide you access to a commerce environment where you can just take and play with it and do whatever you want with it, experiment on it. But that's going to be really important for you. As I said earlier, getting into that admin panel and checking things out. I keep coming back to this point of being curious, but it's so important in learning to ask questions and learning to recognize things that you don't understand and taking those things deeper. That is so important to do that. So I'm just watching a little bit the live stream comments come in, and Rogero, I see your question about debugging the JavaScript. That's a good question, and there's a corollary to Xdebug that is in the browser itself, DevTools, and actually, for that matter, you can also hook up PHP Storm. I use PHP Storm for development, and I'm a front-end developer, but I use it a lot. And you can actually use it for debugging JavaScript there as well. But for me, it's usually easier to just use Chrome DevTools. It's a huge plethora of tools in there in Chrome or Firefox, and use that to learn those tools in debugging the front end in the JavaScript and what those things do. So those are fantastic. I see a shout out for Warden. A lot of my team uses Warden, and it comes with a lot of some of these tools set up and ready to go on there. So like things like Xdebug, much easier to get running than if you just spin up your own environment or something like that. So Warden is a great option. So again, asking questions. Let's see. Actually, I'm going to stay on this slide here. So again, as we're reading, I recommend SwiftAuto study guides as jumping off points, as to kind of get you started. They're going to give you that information, that knowledge, but they're also going to be helpful places as they reference specific places in the code, to go to those places in the code and debug, or rather just like explore, look through the call stack, that sort of a thing. And so those are going to be helpful. But again, asking questions as you go through it. So as you look at core code, for instance, ask yourself questions. What's the use of a product? What is this doing here, and how does this work? How does it relate to other products? There's child products. Why are there child products? What are they doing? Those sorts of things. And other questions relating to development. What is the bare minimum necessary for creating a theme? How do themes interact with modules? What happens if we want to use translations, and how do those interact? Magento 1 had this kind of interesting concept with translations where there was almost like another layer in the system. Magento 2 hands out a little differently. Are you familiar with the way that those relate in there? So that way, if your boss comes to you 3 months from now and says, hey, we need to translate this site, you won't have to be like, oh, how do I do that? Maybe you do run a Google search because you forgot the file name, but otherwise, you know roughly how those things work. Ask yourself those questions and then jump in and start working through those things and keeping track of them. So just can't stress it enough how important it is to get into the code. Other things is to think about if you were to come up with some ideas for what you might build. And that could be kind of hard to do for you, depending on your experience and things like that. And if you have trouble with that, that's a good time to join the study group next week and to ask questions like, hey guys, what can I build that would kind of test my skill set, or like give an opportunity for me to learn and grow in this area? And you might get some help from that and other people. Ask one of your coworkers, your boss, or someone else that maybe works in Magento space. Ask on the SwiftAuto Slack channel. Ideas for what you can build and what you can explore, because each area of that provides something different for you. So for instance, if you're modifying the core versus, wait, I need to clarify that. So back in Magento 1 days, some people would actually go in and change the core files, like make changes to those classes. And in Magento 2, we moved to Composer. And so now anybody that modifies the actual core files, next time they do Composer update, well, they'll see a CLI thing that says, hey, you modified this. Do you want to actually delete these files? But realistically, they would clear out all those changes. So anymore, at least for me, modifying the core isn't actually changing those files. It's a matter of figuring out how we can make the core do something different. So when I say modify the core, I'm not talking about changing core files. I am talking about changing the functionality of those core files. Very different things, but kind of the same concept, and what should have been done in Magento 1 in the first place anyways. And a lot of people figured that out over time. So anyways, a quick clarification on modifying the core. Anyways, if you want to modify core functionality, you would take a different approach. A good example of that is if you want to modify the way that the category looks, right? If you're taking the front-end developer exam and you want to change that and make it look a little different, you would go in and do that through a theme. But if you wanted to add some new functionality to that, let's just say you're taking professional developer and you're thinking about what could we do, and we want to add some functionality to the add to cart process. You want to add a little bit more logic there. You would create a module for that, and you would do that in a different way. You wouldn't do that through a theme. So the other aspect is admin panel versus front end. So, if you are making changes and want to do something in the admin panel, do you understand the difference between that and the front end? What if you put things, template files, for instance, in base as opposed to front end or admin HTML? Are you familiar with the other scopes of Magento and how they work? And if you're not, then those are great times to jump in there and explore that. If you're studying business practitioner, what about stores, store views, websites, global? Do you understand the way that those scopes actually, that's a really important concept to understand. And it can be one that's so easy to miss out on. If you have been working with a merchant that has only one store, and so we have kind of this global, everything applies everywhere sort of setup in their Magento, and you go and you take the test, I think you'll be surprised at some of the functionality that Magento has if you haven't studied up already on the way that websites work and the way that stores and store views work and how they interact with each other and which one the root catalog applies to and all of those sorts of things. And so getting in there and creating some new websites, creating some new store views on your sandbox, on your playground commerce installation is a great way to figure those things out. And finally, as it relates to some kind of specifics on studying, if you're thinking about some abstract concepts, then articles and documentation is where you're going to find that information. And those are the places to look for that. So if you'll notice here, what we kind of identified is some specific areas where to look for types of questions that we might have. And there are different places. That comes back to practicing right. That comes back to studying well. And that's what we want to do. And I want to kind of wrap up this section on how to study with talking about the community a little bit and its importance. I've mentioned the study groups before. There's other areas, or there's other places where you can get involved in the community and ask questions and help other people. It is so important to help other people, in answering their questions, because again, that helps you. And so if you haven't already, swiftauto.com/challenge and go join one of our study groups, be a part of those meetings. And again, super laid back, super chill environment. Don't worry about asking a question that you feel like is a dumb question. That might be something that you hesitate to ask a question because it's like, oh, this is a dumb question. Don't let that stop you. Don't let that stop you. Ask the question. Now, put some thought into the question, right? Especially if you're writing it on Slack. Put some thought, write the question out, and then reread it and make sure that it's clear and that it's understandable as you can do it. If English isn't your first language, that's no problem. That's okay if you have typos or grammar problems. Things like that aren't a problem. But just make sure that it's the best that you can do in helping other people help you as you ask a question. And don't be afraid to learn in that sort of a way where you're asking questions, because all of us don't know something, right? There is so much stuff about the way that specifics, backend related stuff like server side things and CI/CD and things like that I'm just not very well versed in those things. And I'm stronger on the front end, right? Like React or something like that. Magento's front end, things like that are stronger points for me. So we all have those weaknesses. Let's not be afraid to embrace that and to ask for help on this. So again, then offering help is another great way for you to learn. And that's an opportunity for you to grow your own skill set. And in answering questions on Stack Exchange can also be a good way to do that, or the SwiftAuto Slack channel. When I answer questions, I often go into the code and check things out. Sometimes I might remember off the top of my head, but oftentimes not. It's there. I kind of might have an idea, even if you don't. you don't need to let that slow you down. You can just go jump into there and check it out. So there's a channel on the SwiftOtter Slack group that is Today I Studied, and so I recommend that you check that out. Let me go back over here and give you that slide right there, swiftotter.com/Slack, where you can join our community. There's over 1,000 people on there. I can't believe it. It's crazy. I don't know how it got so big. It's pretty awesome. And there's a lot of community and a lot of great people on there. A lot of really smart people on there as well. So I highly recommend you check that out, and go ahead and submit your scores as well as you take the test. So really looking forward to hearing how you all do. I know there's 2 of you that have taken the test so far, and I'm sure there will be many, many more over the upcoming weeks. So let's wrap things up here with a little bit of Q&A. I'm going to start watching the chat a little bit on the live stream. So if you have any questions, go ahead and fire away. But again, stay on it. Don't slack in studying, and don't let up in studying. Stay after it, and ask questions. Be curious. Be willing to ask questions that maybe you feel are dumb questions, because they aren't. Just go for it and jump in, and you'll do great. Stay after it, and I'm excited for you guys as you take these exams and get those certifications behind your name. So a little bit of discussion around translations on here. I think it is important. Actually, translations can do a number of different things. Sometimes if we want to change, for instance, just the text on something, instead of, for instance, one of our clients one point changed add to cart to add to basket. There's a lot of references to the cart in Magento. And so if you're familiar with the way that translations work, you could be like, oh, we don't have to go in and override all these templates. We can just use translations to change the string and what that is, instead of add to cart, add to basket, or references to the basket, that sort of thing. So wow, it's so great to see you guys all on here. I'm so glad that you joined. Why we need UI components? I tell you, that's such a great question. I will tell you, I'm not the best friends of UI components, and there's a couple areas of Magento that I think are a little bit unfortunate. I'm not usually afraid to say that, and that's not dissing Magento. It's just acknowledging, there's some areas that are harder to work with and a little bit more unfortunate. Knockout.js is interesting, but the reason the point of UI components is extensibility and flexibility. Like that's what it comes down to. And those things are really important with the way that Magento is built. It's built to not be the end, but it's built to be the beginning, and to be layered on top of and built with and customized and changed and extended. And I'll tell you what, UI components are very powerful. They have so much capability, and they can be tied into and things like that. Frankly, I think their biggest limitation is the technology behind them. The fact that we're using Knockout.js and jQuery and Require.js to run those, I think that's their biggest weakness. I would say there's some architectural problems with them as well, but as we learn and get used to working with them, those can be kind of worked around and things like that. But that's the point of UI components. They definitely have a place, even though they're not quite perfect. So okay, great question. Is it better to study alone or in a group? I think the answer is both. You don't want to study only alone, and you don't want to study only in a group, right? Because sometimes you're going to need to have those deep dives are going to be best done alone, but you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes you can be studying and completely miss something that someone else might know and might contribute in some of these study groups. Those study groups every other week are such an important part of learning, because you have that opportunity to ask questions, excuse me, and to be a part of a community there where we are all working together to gain understanding and gain knowledge of Magento. So you definitely want to do it both. If you're just studying alone, you'll handicap yourself, and that's not where you want to be. So definitely do it with some help. And I would say this too. I know a lot of us developers are a little bit hesitant to be in groups, right? But just because we feel hesitant and feel a little bit less comfortable in a group doesn't mean that we shouldn't. And as a matter of fact, we should anyways. We should go ahead and join that group and be a part of that. That doesn't mean that we have to be the most vocal participant or anything like that. But just join in. You know, we can do it, and it's good for us to be a part of that. Again, that doesn't mean we have to be the life of the party, but just be part of the group and join in at least on something. You know, at least those bi-weekly meetings, those study sessions. If you do a custom front end for Magento, would you do it in Vue or in React? Well, that's a little bit of a tricky question because of the current state of the tools that are available for that. Magento is investing some in PWA Studio, and it's fairly mature. It would be a good option, and I think since Magento itself is investing in it, I think it'll be here for a good while, and I think it'll be the way of the future. Is my opinion on that, is my take, and so that's the way that I would go. I personally am partial to React. You know, it's funny. I don't even know why necessarily, because I love Vue. It's really a fantastic framework. But React, and to kind of clarify or be clear on this, I haven't worked with Vue 3, and Vue 3 looks pretty awesome. So I think Vue 3 is definitely a contender for React, and you know, I would say they're about equal. But if it were me and I was going for building out a custom front end or a PWA front end for a Magento store, I would definitely go with I would almost definitely go with the PWA Studio. Obviously, I would do a requirements gathering and identify the different options on the market and where they are at and things like that. But I would lean towards PWA Studio out of the gate by default. So I would do that. And then the kind of a follow-up question on GraphQL. GraphQL is incredible. It's fantastic. I mean, it's this sort of dynamic connection layer to the server that REST kind of limited us a little bit in some ways. There was a little bit of a glass ceiling in REST just because we didn't have the same sort of control over the response as we do in GraphQL. We would have to create new REST endpoints in order to get more control over that response. So as with a lot of things, there's a little bit of give and take here because GraphQL can be a little bit slower because it's a little bit more difficult to cache. But GraphQL is a super cool tool, and I haven't gotten to use it a whole ton, but what I have, I've enjoyed, and it's pretty cool. So why did Magento introduce dbschema.xml? I like the developer questions on here. Definitely can relate to that. But dbschema is a wonderful upgrade over the old install data and install schema scripts that we had in there, because if you've worked on any Magento projects that have been around for a while, you get this, like, you open the folder that has those scripts in them and you're like, whoa, what is going on here? And it's like, what's the current state of the database? Like, how does this even work? And it got a little bit crazy sometimes. So DB schema was a welcome change for that, as they solved that problem by having a code place that was a source of truth for the database. So now we have two things, database and DB schema, and they fit together very well. It works really well. That's wow, that was a wonderful upgrade. I'm so glad Magento did that. So question on, does Magento plan a new front end stack that's not related to PWA? For instance, you know, in the same way that they currently use Require.js, Knockout.js, jQuery, that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't know what their plans are in the future. I can hope that they would introduce something like that, but honestly, it just depends on kind of the place of PWA Studio, excuse me, and what that looks like. So I can't say for sure, obviously. I guess I would just say it wouldn't surprise me either way, and I hope they do, but it would be a big undertaking, and there would be a whole lot of Magento 2 stores that would then also have to have some attention given to them. So I would say it could go either way, but you know, it in some ways it's inevitable, right? Because technology is limited in lifetime usually. Like, think about what was around 20 years ago versus today. So, you know, will we get a front end next year? or this year, I'd be a little surprised. Will we get one within the next 5 years? Wouldn't really be surprised by that. So it's just the way software development goes. And but yeah, we haven't heard anything from Adobe on any plans on that. What do you think the limitations of Magento are? The thing is, this is a little bit of a all software has limitations, because if you build something that is as flexible as anything there is out there, the limitation is actually that it's harder to start using, that the introduction is a little bit slower on that and things like that. So Magento, I would say, has a little bit of a steeper learning curve. It's going to take a little bit more to get a store running with Magento as opposed to one of the other competitors. And so that would be a limitation. I think there's some potential, or there's some challenges with the architecture here and there, like UI components, the less architecture, the front end, some of that isn't ideal. But on the other hand, some of the front end things are really great, like layout XML, incredibly powerful. That's a impressive layout mechanism. So it has some really good things. Plugins, interceptors, just absolutely incredible. The way that we can, get into specific methods and make changes on there. So those are, as with so many things, those are the trade-offs that there are. And in making a decision, it comes down to that business decision, which one is going to serve the need best. That's why even with React versus Vue.js, like, which one is going to suit the needs of the client the best, and which one, if development costs are fairly similar for them, which one would look better for them, right? If there's some better name recognition or something, like even those things, we can get down to that level of minutia, which, for something that's as similar to Vue as Vue.js and React are. But again, just depending on the other factors that are at play there. Great questions. And I hope I'm not missing any of the questions, but we will go ahead and wrap it up here. Tell you what, it's just been awesome being on with you guys. I'm excited to see more of your names come across the screen as having passed and gotten those certifications. It's totally worth it. Stay after it. You're doing good. And it is so exciting to be able to get those credentials and finally reach that certification level. So I am sure that a lot of you will do that. A lot of you will have some cool t-shirts. A couple of you will have some great new headphones as a result of this as well. And of course, those things are hard to pass up. So worth studying for and working for, that's for sure. I will make a quick interjection right here for one more question. Your opinion on Page Builder? Do you use it? Page Builder is super flexible, and it does a lot of things, but it's not super mature as well. So it hasn't reached a level of mass adoption where there would be a lot of third-party integrations and things like that with it. So it is a really good step right in the right direction over what was previously there, just the Tiny Mice editor and the plain text, that sort of thing. So it's a step in the right direction, but it also has limitations, and as you mentioned, it's actually a little bit slow, frankly, but it's using Knockout.js, and that's going to be a limitation for it. So there's as so often is the case, there's things on both sides there. Actually, we'll do one more here. Book details for certification. So we don't have any news in terms of some of the updates that we have right now coming down the pipeline, but we are working hard on some updates and some future things. And I would just send you to our website, swiftauto.com, for any updates on those things. So anyways, we're going to wrap it up here. Thanks so much for being a part of this. Again, join the Slack community. Make sure that you're on those groups next week. Those are so important, and definitely think you should be a part of those things. And I wish you success as you move forwards towards your certification. Keep up the good work.